just going to wait a few minutes for people to join, but I have Leslie with me today, and I am super excited to have her on as our special guest. So a little bit about kind of how I met Leslie. So Leslie is actually who introduced me to the Enneagram.
Yes.
Was it like 8 years ago? 9 years ago?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Before our second children.
It was before our second children, who are 6 years old now.
Yes.
Going on 7.
Yes.
Well, today's topic is going to be about the Enneagram, relationships, and love addiction, which is an area of specialty that Leslie has. But we thought we would just go in and introduce ourselves a little bit and then get into just what is love addiction and how it shows up with Enneagram types. I'll go ahead and introduce myself first, and then I'll have Leslie introduce herself. Many of you already know who I am. My name is Lindsay Frazier. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a certified sex therapist and an IA accredited professional out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I have a private practice where I specialize in relationships and sexuality utilizing the Enneagram. And my Enneagram type, which I often forget to mention when I do these, I am a 9 I'm a 9 who has social in the dominant position and sexual instinct in the repressed position. Well, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Leslie,
Yes.
and what you do?
I am Leslie Root, and I'm a counselor. I've been counseling for a long time now, coming up, I think, owning my practice for maybe 15 years. And I have been into the Enneagram even before I got into counseling. So it's been a passion of mine and a way that I've understood what the work that I do with clients and really the way that I understand the world. I am an Enneagram 8 wing 7. I'm sexual dominant and social is in my repressed area. So we're opposites.
We are opposites. Interesting.
Yes. And I work with clients around a lot of intimacy disorders, in particular love addiction. And some of you might be wondering, should I just jump right in?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, talk a little bit about exactly what love addiction is. This is actually an area of expertise that I learned a lot from Leslie because this isn't necessarily my area of expertise. So just explain it a little bit. I think some people have ideas of like what that is, but don't actually fully understand it.
Yes. So when clients are struggling with love addiction, I really see it from the lens of this is an intimacy disorder that generally stems, actually it always stems from early ruptures in attachment for my clients. So these early ruptures in attachment were with the caregivers. And sometimes it's both caregivers, both mom and dad, or maybe it was grandparents, etc. But the ruptures happened, and the ruptures could be of an emotional nature where they were emotionally neglected or enmeshed with, or they could be physical neglect or physical abuse as well. So these early ruptures lead to some intimacy disorders in clients, and one intimacy disorder in particular is love addiction. And with love addiction, what I have is I'll have clients who will have generally an obsession, and usually they're going to have an object they are obsessed with, and that object happens to be another person. And so when this obsession occurs, the person can sometimes become ritualistic in the ways that they're doing things. They can't stop thinking about the person. They'll put aside their whole life for this person. Friends will be like, where are you? Who are you? Why are you giving up yourself for this person? And the person can't stop. So when the person starts to find out, like, I don't know how to give up this unavailable other partner, and generally speaking, in love addiction, there is a love avoidant on board. That's a fancy word for someone who is unavailable. So what will happen in the love addiction cycle is the person will be very obsessed, focused on pursuing a pretty unavailable partner, but usually it does not start out that way in the love addiction cycle.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think is really interesting that is like one of the things you mentioned is like how this is really coming from an attachment place. And can you talk a little bit about sort of like what is the attachment wounding around this that will kind of create that cycle or that system with clients in your office?
Yes, generally with love addiction, we are dealing with developmental emotional immaturity. So I take it a lot from Pia Melody's perspective, the post-induction therapy model, and Brenda Schaefer is another one of my mentors. We are talking about early ruptures with the caregivers. Generally with love addiction, the caregiver was emotionally unavailable. So the child was not getting the care, the mirroring. Maybe you guys know what mirroring means, which means another person person sees you for who you are. You don't have to be a certain way, act a certain way. You are honored and cherished for who you are. And in love addiction systems, the child was generally, that was not happening. They were emotionally abandoned, sometimes physically abandoned by maybe mom, by maybe dad, by maybe both.
How do you see the love addiction showing up in like longer term relationships, for instance? I'm really curious about that.
Yes. So in the cycles of love addiction, sometimes I'm getting clients who are in the dating phase, and sometimes I'm getting clients who are in a consummated relationship. So sometimes it's a marriage, sometimes it's a longer term relationship where they are doing a love addiction dance. And how that love addiction dance looks is usually depending on Enneagram type. You're going to hear different complaints. And so that's where I would say Enneagram is so helpful in this work, because the love addiction dance will look different for the different types, which means the solution will look different as well. In the love addiction dance, you're usually having that pursuer distancer relationship experience, but it's on a different level. And the emotional ego state that the client is usually presenting with when they're in the love addiction phase is pretty young. And so we're talking like 10 or younger. They're pretty wounded child ego state. And the person who's in the distancer role is generally going to look more teenager, although everyone, when they're not aware of these aspects, believes they're in their functional adult, but they're really not.
Yeah, I think, when you and I were talking, we were talking a little bit about that dynamic of the love addict and then the love avoidant, right? And I think one of the interesting things that you and I were talking about is just even that idea of like love bombing.
Yes.
And sort of like what that looks like and what that actually means. And so I'm really curious to kind of hear more about how that is showing up sort of in this addiction cycle as well.
Oh my goodness. So should I tell on the Enneagram types?
Yeah, you should. That's what everybody's here for.
Sorry. So I have a couple typical love bombers, and in that I've worked with clients longer term. I would say seeing them go through their cycles and their addictive acting out behaviors. A few types that tend to be more love bombers are Enneagram 7s. I'm so sorry, Enneagram 7, but you guys are one of the bigger culprits for love bombing, but I don't believe it's conscious. So we hear a lot about this narcissistic love bombing, etc. And I actually think when the love avoidant is in a love bombing phase, they really believe it. Like they think it's the cat's pajamas. I've met this person. They're who I've always dreamed of. They're kind of the answer to all my prayers. And initially it is really like love on fire for the couple. Maybe they're having really hot sex. Like the person, the love addict, is getting all
Sounds
the
like
attention.
Yes,
I'm sorry. Not always with female 7s though, but definitely with my male 7s. Have you seen this maybe?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that, when we were meeting beforehand and we were talking about is that there's sort of this assumption with love bombing that the person is intentionally doing things to hook the person in.
Yes.
And I love how you're talking about, like, actually, in reality, when we're talking about this love addiction and love avoidance cycle, that isn't actually what they're doing. They do believe all the things that they're saying during that love bombing phase.
Yes.
Now, we do have narcissists, which is a whole different conversation, where they might actually do more conscious manipulation by using love bombing to get the things that they need and want. But the majority of people aren't actually doing that. And I think it's so important for us to recognize that they do believe in the moment what they're actually saying. And I think I loved how when we were talking that you brought that in, because it is so good to pay attention to that. They're not trying to manipulate you consciously. Of course, there's maybe some unconscious motivations or unconscious manipulations, but let's be honest, every Enneagram type and every person manipulates.
Yes.
We all need to get our needs met, and we all do this in a different way. And I think we need to not think of manipulation necessarily as a bad thing. It's a way of coping. And conscious manipulation is actually pretty rare.
It is so rare. In fact, when I've seen some of the types that are a little more run love avoidant, but they'll be very available at first, it is because they had to do that in their family system. They had generally an enmeshing parent, a parent that was overwhelming, who had overwhelming needs they could not care for. And thus the distancing will occur once the person who runs more love addicted becomes needing more and more. And the reality is, the person in the love addicted patterning is insatiable. They're in an insatiable wound that a partnership will not fulfill. Will not fulfill. And so I think sometimes when we get into this, like, oh, avoid these love bombers, it's like, well, okay, let's come back home and let's see what wound we need to heal that leaves us vulnerable to attraction to people who are pretty unavailable.
Exactly. I completely agree with what you're saying. Like, we have our own responsibilities of like understanding our own stuff that makes us susceptible to that experience. And I think, like, when I think of like the Brene Brown stuff too, it's like that generosity again for people. Like, we're all trying the best that we can in any given moment, and both the love avoidant and the love addict, they're operating out of a very, very wounded place, and they will continue to do so until they do their work.
Yes, and I think, in fact, getting too focused on the other party prevents us from doing our own work, because oftentimes, and even those who know the Enneagram well, the person who is love addicted is generally fantasy bonded. What that means is they're bonded to a non-reality. It's kind of like maybe you've seen your friends go through phases where they love very unavailable people, and you're like, what reality are they in? They're not in normal reality. They're in a fantasy bonded reality. Now that was adaptive for them in their family of origin because they had to be so that they could survive. It is now maladaptive in a real-time relationship because your partner can't heal the early wounds of attachment, and they cannot meet those needs. Those needs are really larger than what a relationship could appeal to.
Well, I know that they're here for how Enneagram types show up as well.
Oh,
So
no.
maybe we should talk about, I know that we're not going to get to every type, but I had asked Leslie just to kind of pull out some types that she knows well and sort of how they show up in her office. So let's spill the beans.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so my number one love addict. You guys have a guess?
Anybody have a guest that wants to comment
Anyone?
that's here?
What type is most likely to struggle with love addiction? So being in that pursuer, love me, love me, love me role. It's generally Enneagram 2.
That's what I was thinking.
So sorry.
Sorry, twos.
So sorry. In particular, 2s are heart triads. So if you think about it, 2s relationships are huge. Being seen, being wanted, being known for who they are. They are set up for that, and oftentimes they're set up to do that with people who are pretty unavailable. And what 2s will do is they'll become really indispensable within a relationship with someone who is not generally very available. Now, it's not all 2s, but I'd say when clients are coming in and they are pretty heavily struggling with the love addicted behavior, oftentimes they're in the heart triad. They're in the heart triad, but the way they express it is different. So 2 looks very different than a 3. Should I talk about 3?
Yeah, talk a little. I'm curious about what you're bringing up around the heart triad. Talk a little bit about the 3 types of the heart triad and how they show up.
I feel the heart triad is so available to the heart center. And when you think about the heart center, that's all about love, care, connection, our human need for being very close and understanding each other. And so with the heart triad, I generally see love addicted behavior even in consummated relationships, and not even in a lot of consummated relationships have love addicted patterns. But with 3, I tend to see more. Should I do this?
Yeah.
Okay. So with a lot of 3s, I tend to see more acting out behavior in that they will create a love addicted cycle outside of their primary relationship. So with 3s in particular, the love addiction is generally not within the available partnership. It's usually in an affair type behavior.
Which I know, I'm sure if you're a 3 on here and you're hearing this,
Sorry. With love addiction too, there's usually a secondary addiction. So it's not only love addiction the person will use. With 2s, the secondary addiction is sometimes food. It could be withholding food for themselves or overindulging in food.
Oh, Sam is asking, why do you think that is? With 3?
I think the nature of feeling repressed. Those 3s are feeling repressed, but they very much want to be seen, needed, etc. And so when they have when they have a secure base partnership, and 3s tend to find partners who are pretty with them, dedicated to them, as an asserter type. When they have that secure base, they actually feel almost smothered sometimes. They tend to run a little more love avoidant by nature. The asserter triad runs more love avoidant. Maybe I'm saying too much here.
Oh, so interesting. So you're saying the 3, 7s, and 8s tend to be a little bit more love avoidant. Okay.
So when they show love addicted behaviors, it's generally that they are doing it in a more affair type situation. So 8s are more likely to do like straight up sex, like they're just banging on the side.
So they might have just the one-off sexual experience, which is interesting because that rings very true from the experiences that I've had with clients that are 8s that have infidelity. It isn't actually often affairs. It's actually often like paying a sex worker or a one-off. I met someone at the bar and I banged them. Things like that. But it makes sense also, like from what Sam and I have talked about, sort of with that insatiable 8 sexual energy and really just like wanting to feel alive. This is so interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do.
Yes.
And they are related. The insatiableness in the 2 and the 8 is significant. So 2s and 8s generally have some type of love addicted structure going on. So if there's not an acting out behavior, they're usually doing some of that push-pull within the relationship that is much more connected to the early wounding than the other types I've seen.
And then to go back to, because we did talk about the 4s,
which
are also in the heart triad. And I go to, like, they're looking for the knight in shining armor to save them.
Oh, yeah.
And so I am really curious what you would add about 4s.
4s, this is Brenda Schaefer's work. 4s are romance addicts. 4s are romance addicts. Now, that does not always include a partner. Sometimes they're very much in a romance in their head. Sometimes they're in romances like physical book romances, etc. So 4s are writing the story, and they are very much into the longing. The addiction is more in the longing and the feeling than in the consummation.
So would you say, Leslie, it's like the seeking of the perfect partner that will save them?
Sometimes it's like, it's just so interesting. I've seen a lot of different behaviors with 4s in the longing. I'd be curious what you'd say.
I mean, I think my experience with 4s in particular is there is sort of this fantasy of the ideal partner that can actually exist. And so there can be frustration then with the current partner who they initially actually thought was this person, and then they'll move to, like, once there's a secure almost attachment within the relationship, then this longing for this other sort of romanticized image of a partner that they haven't met yet, that their soul flame, twin flame is out there somewhere and they haven't met that. And then oftentimes what I see is that nobody actually fulfills that. Is that what you see too?
Yes, I do. And oftentimes they're in the past or the future, and it's hard to a lot of times get pragmatic about the present in the treatment of 4s. So I would say yes. So sometimes in their love addicted patterning, they are much more looking for an ideal versus reality is not what they hoped or dreamed of. And it takes a lot of support and therapeutic intervention to even like come down from that, I think, for 4s to know, like, hey, I'm going to have enough support to come down from that.
One of the questions I have is, like, when do you find sort of love addicts or love avoidance like coming into therapy? Like, what is the thing that could sort of brings them into that therapy process?
Right. I would say love addiction is one of the harder intimacy disorders to treat because it is so painful, and relapse is part of recovery. So what brings them in is generally like a breakup, or the love object is pulling away. And so as soon as that love object starts to pull away, the person will go through withdrawal, and it is similar to like cocaine, heroin withdrawal. It's awful. It's really awful. And they need a lot of support through the withdrawal period. So usually people are reaching out because something has happened where they can no longer engage in that relationship in the way they used to, and there's no more dopamine hit left.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's really interesting when you talk about it sort of like in the stance of almost like those chemical pieces that are happening in the brain that sort of keep you wanting to engage in this cycle. I think that's one of the hardest things I see for people that are sort of in this love addict cycle is like there's when they have the breakup or the affair comes out or whatever's happening around it, like they want to not repeat it, but they like how it feels when they're in it, that they will oftentimes, it's such a hard cycle to shift and change, like any other drug or alcohol or even sexual compulsive addiction.
I agree. A lot of times when you see what I make up when I see more sexual compulsivity, it's generally more, they're more love avoidant. And so love avoidance is, I make up, easier to treat than love addiction, because love addiction is about that early abandonment, which is excruciating to address and to withdraw from. Yeah. It's a lot. It's similar to, they talk about when babies are removed from their mothers, the chemical withdrawal in their body. So when people are doing the love addict cycle, they're going through a similar chemical withdrawal. It's rough. Wow. It's rough. So you can see that these situations can become really high risk. And so when you're looking at when things sometimes move into higher risk, where the person's like, they will stop doing the things with their children that they do when they're not in the love addiction cycle. They'll stop doing the things that they need to do for themselves. They'll avoid responsibilities at work. They'll be doing things that are higher risk, as far as like risking their job, their relationships with their children, their relationships with their communities.
So it's really quite destructive.
Yes.
These cycles that are happening for people, because it not only it affects so many different aspects of their lives. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When parents or couples are in a love addicted cycle too, the children get very little attention. So oftentimes with clients who have love addiction, who are coming in, we're doing a thorough history to find out, hey, what was your parents' relationship like? And you will generally see the roots of their own behaviors there. And Enneagram is totally a part of that.
Well, I realize this time is going really fast, but I wanted to know if you had any other honorable mentions in the Enneagram world that you wanted, different types that are worth mentioning here. And then I thought we would just kind of start to wrap up. As always, these Sexy First Fridays go so quickly.
Right.
And we could talk about this so much more in depth.
Yes. For each type I've seen different patterns. I would say twos are very commonly in the love addicted stance. Also with ones, I see them move into the co-addict stance most frequently. And while they may be attracted to very unavailable partners, they are in that frustration triad. So the way that they express their frustrations with the person is significant, but you'll notice a lot of times they have a hard time letting go of relationships that are done. So sometimes it's like letting go or setting the boundaries for Enneagram ones. With Enneagram 9.
Oh, you're mentioning us now.
I know. I was like, how should I talk about this? I think they can go into a lot of where they're disassociating.
I was going to say, I wonder if we are maybe a little bit, and can be a little bit love avoidant.
It's interesting, although sexual nines can be very love addicted. They're some of the most love addicted types I've seen.
I mean, that actually makes sense. And it would make sense that, maybe social dominance or self-preservation dominance could be the avoidance. But I think it's really interesting too. I know Sam and I have talked a lot about sort of instinctual stacking too, and just how that'll play a huger factor. And I would imagine the sexual instinct dominance piece would really lead to more love addiction.
It does, and surprise, surprise, I'm sexual dominant instinct, so I get a lot of love addicts.
See, it's interesting because in my practice, I get more of the avoidance.
Oh, you too, yes, right.
Well, I just want to say, it's been a great pleasure to have you here today, Leslie. And like I said, when we do these Sexy First Fridays, it's so hard to there's always so much good information and we can't get to everything, but I think this is such an important topic as well, because I think the Enneagram type plays such a huge huge role in how you're going to show up in those different ways and everything as well. Well, talk a little bit about what you have going on, anything that you're offering or things that you're doing here in the city. Are you taking new clients?
Well, yes, I'm taking a few new clients, and I will be having a group coaching program for people who want to recover from love addiction. So that's going to be coming up. If you're interested, please reach out. I'm going to be pretty picky with who's going to be in that group for people that are really ready to address it and to get to the next side for healthy belonging and connection.
Oh, I love that you're doing that. Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't even know you were doing that.
Yes, I am, because one thing with love addiction and treating that, we need group support. And the Enneagram is a great way to understand ourselves and depersonalize other people's behaviors.
Yeah, I imagine with like more group stuff too, is like kind of having to call each other out.
Yeah.
On what you're doing. Yeah.
I think a lot of it is mirroring and support.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the root of love addiction is that there was improper attention, love, connection provided for that individual.
Yeah. And well, as you know, we Sexy First Fridays, Sam, who is on here today, she's going to be back next month. And she's going to be off of maternity leave, and so I'm going to have my other half back. But it's been so enjoyable to have two local therapists here in Minneapolis to kind of come on and share a little bit more about what they do in their therapy practice. I thought it was really important to have Leslie because she's the one that like started this journey for me. Her and Brooke was on here as well. I was telling people like in the previous one where it's like you guys would talk about this in a good old 9 fashion, like I didn't ask until like 3 or 4 lunches in, like what exactly they were talking about.
Yes.
And I'm so glad I did because it's made such a huge difference in my practice. And you were actually the one that encouraged me to do more sexuality stuff with the Enneagram. You said to me, I can't remember how long ago it was, like, Lindsay, you need to be doing this. You need to be doing this. And I think I just want to thank you for that because I don't know if I would be here if you hadn't encouraged me to do that. So I am really happy to have her. I am really excited to have Sam back. And we had quite a few of you hop on today. That is great to see. I don't know if you can see this or not, but somebody parked across the way and it's like blaring in my eyes. So like, I'm like, I can't see anything. So hopefully you can see me okay. And we will be back the first Friday in March for Sexy First Friday. Sam and I don't know yet what the topic will be, but we will keep you posted. And if you have ideas of things you'd like to hear from us, you let us know. Oh, thank you, Sam. That's so great to hear. And everybody have a wonderful Friday. Take care. Bye.